The Middle East is once again on the brink of a profound and potentially devastating escalation as Iranian forces and their proxies launch a deadly wave of attacks in retaliation for Israeli military strikes. The cycle of violence, long a defining feature of the region's instability, has reached a new, dangerous intensity. This new storm of fire and blood threatens not only Israel and Iran, but also the wider region and global security. Background: a region on edge. The tension between Iran and Israel is rooted in decades of deep ideological, political, and strategic rivalry. Iran has positioned itself as a champion of the Palestinian cause and a vehement opponent of Israel's existence, while Israel views Iran as its most significant existential threat due to Tehran's nuclear ambitions, ballistic missile programs, and support for armed groups hostile to Israel. Over recent years, this tension has manifested in a shadow war, a mix of covert operations, cyber attacks, proxy conflicts, and periodic military strikes. Yet, recent events have dramatically intensified the confrontation into outright military exchanges, triggering the storm, Israeli strikes and Iranian retaliation. The immediate trigger for the latest surge in violence was a series of targeted Israeli airstrikes against Iranian-backed militias in Syria, Iraq, and Gaza. These strikes aimed to disrupt arms shipments, degrade missile capabilities, and eliminate high-value commanders involved in planning attacks on Israeli soil. Iran responded with a deadly missile barrage targeting Israeli cities and military installations. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) units launched ballistic and cruise missiles along with drone swarms designed to overwhelm Israel's air defenses. This marked one of the most significant Iranian offensives in years. The scope and impact of Iran's deadly attack. Iran's retaliation involved a multi-pronged offensive. Ballistic missile strikes. Iranian missiles struck northern Israel near Haifa and southern cities such as Ashdod and Be'er Sheva. Though Israel's Iron Dome intercepted many, some missiles caused significant damage, including the destruction of residential buildings and military sites. Drone swarms. Coordinated drone attacks were launched against Israeli radar and command centers, aiming to blind Israeli defenses and create vulnerabilities for follow-up strikes. Proxy group attacks. Iranian-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza intensified rocket barrages into Israeli territory, launching hundreds of rockets daily and engaging in ground skirmishes along border zones. Cyber attacks. Iranian hackers targeted Israeli critical infrastructure, including power grids and financial systems, to sow chaos and weaken civilian morale. The consequences have been severe. Casualties have mounted on both sides, with hundreds of civilians and combatants killed or wounded. Infrastructure damage has disrupted daily life, causing power outages, transportation disruptions, and a surge in displaced populations. Israel's response: fire and fury. In response to Iran's missile and proxy attacks, Israel launched a comprehensive military campaign. Airstrikes on Iranian targets. The Israeli Air Force conducted precision strikes on Iranian bases in Syria and Iraq, targeting missile launchers, weapons depots, and leadership compounds of IRGC commanders. Ground operations. Special forces engaged in covert cross-border operations to disrupt Iranian supply lines and eliminate key figures involved in planning attacks. Iron Dome and defense systems. Israel's missile defense system has been pushed to its limits, intercepting thousands of incoming projectiles but struggling with saturation attacks. Civil defense measures. Israel mobilized emergency services and reinforced shelters, preparing civilians for potential escalations. Israel framed its operations as self-defense against Iranian aggression, emphasizing the necessity to prevent Iran from gaining further military footholds near its borders. Regional spillover, a wider conflict brewing. The Iran-Israel clash has drawn in multiple regional actors and threatens to escalate into a broader war. Lebanon, Hezbollah, backed by Iran, has fired rockets and engaged in skirmishes with Israeli forces along the Lebanese border. The group's extensive missile arsenal poses a significant threat. Gaza, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad increased rocket attacks on southern Israel, with Israel responding with heavy bombardment of Gaza Strip targets, worsening the humanitarian crisis. Iraq. Iranian militias operating in Iraq have launched rocket attacks on U.S. bases, increasing the risk of direct confrontations involving American forces. Syria. Iranian and Russian forces support the Assad regime and help facilitate Iranian military infrastructure. Israeli strikes in Syria risk drawing Syria deeper into the conflict. The human cost: fire, blood, and displacement. Beyond military and strategic implications, the conflict exacts a brutal toll on civilians caught in the crossfire. Casualties. Hundreds of civilians have been killed or wounded in missile strikes and retaliatory bombardments. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and emergency services stretched thin. Displacement. Thousands have fled conflict zones, creating a new wave of refugees within and beyond national borders. Infrastructure destruction. Schools, hospitals, residential buildings, and power grids have been damaged or destroyed, plunging many into darkness and chaos. Psychological trauma. The constant threat of attacks has inflicted severe psychological harm on populations, with children and vulnerable groups suffering acute stress and trauma. International reactions and diplomatic maneuvers. The international community has responded with calls for restraint, but remains divided. United Nations. The UN Secretary-General urged both sides to cease hostilities immediately and return to negotiations, warning of catastrophic regional consequences. United States. The U.S. reaffirmed its support for Israel's right to self-defense, but also urged de-escalation, deploying additional troops to the region to deter Iranian aggression. European Union. EU leaders called for calm and emphasized the urgent need for dialogue, warning of the conflict's destabilizing effects on global peace. Russia and China. Both called for restraint but opposed foreign interference, with Russia expressing concern over Israeli strikes in Syria. The strategic calculus: why this conflict matters. This new storm of fire and blood between Iran and Israel is not just a bilateral issue, it represents a critical juncture in Middle Eastern geopolitics. Nuclear ambitions. Iran's advancing nuclear program remains a core Israeli concern, driving its aggressive efforts to thwart Iran's regional military expansion. Proxy warfare. Iran's reliance on proxy militias allows it to exert influence while limiting direct confrontations. But recent escalations show Tehran willing to risk direct missile attacks. Global energy security. The conflict threatens vital oil shipping lanes in the Gulf, risking disruptions to the global energy supply. Superpower rivalry. The U.S. and its allies back Israel, while Iran aligns with Russia and China, reflecting a broader global power struggle playing out in the region. Possible paths forward: de-escalation or deeper conflict. The future trajectory of this conflict hinges on several factors. Diplomatic engagement, back-channel talks, possibly involving regional powers like Egypt, Jordan, and Gulf states, could help negotiate ceasefires. International pressure. Coordinated global diplomatic pressure could force Iran and Israel to reduce hostilities. Military deterrence. Continued Israeli military dominance may deter Iran, but risks provoking further retaliation. Proxy group influence. The role of Hezbollah, Hamas, and other militias could either escalate or de-escalate violence depending on their decisions. Conclusion: a region at a crossroads. Iran's deadly attacks and Israel's fierce retaliation have plunged the Middle East into another chapter of violent conflict, a storm of fire and blood that threatens millions. The deep-rooted animosities, compounded by geopolitical rivalries and religious fervor, make a peaceful resolution elusive. As missiles rain down and rockets fly, the human cost mounts. The international community faces the urgent challenge of preventing this localized conflict from spiraling into a full-scale regional or global war. The coming days will be critical in determining whether diplomacy can stem the tide of violence or if the flames of war will engulf the region further.